I hope all of you have practiced few logic building exercises. I would like to tell you here that I have even created one more playlist in my channel with the name Logic Building, and I have uploaded the very first video yesterday. And if you people are facing any difficulty in solving on your own, then you can refer to that. Whatever the logic building hour plans you have here, M1, M2A, M2B, I have uploaded the very last problem in M2B, that is message controlled robot movement. I felt it's quite complicated for uh, most of you. That is the reason I thought of explaining the problem and sharing my solution to that. So those who feel that it is complicated for you also to solve it on your own, you can refer my solution and understand it and further optimize it in your own understandable way. And you can see in the comment section, one of your super senior have given the optimized code as well. So that's the reason I have shared my solution and waiting for some optimized solutions. And I already got one optimized one. So you can try and share your own solutions in the comment section. You can go through that playlist in my channel, and then you can look for logic building playlist. There I have uploaded message controlled robot movement solution. So this is for your information. And I do remember that in my last class I have covered these classes and objects along with this keyword usage. So we understood with examples how an object is created and what is the role of constructor, and I have also explained you the uses of static block, initialization block, and then the constructor block. And I hope all of you experienced them in your own local machines by testing it. So the first executed block is the static block. After the static block, the block that gets executed is the initialization block. That too only when the constructor is invoked. So whenever the constructor is invoked, then the initialization block gets executed, and then the constructor block gets executed. So this is the order of the blocks execution in the Java program. And another thing we also understood is static block gets loaded only one time, that too when the class is loaded, whereas initialization block gets executed each time the constructor is involved, and then constructor block gets executed each time you create a new object. So these are the things we understood. I have even explained you with examples the uses of static and init block and all that, and also I have explained you the use of this keyword. So how this can be used? So this can be used to access the instance variable which have the same name with the local variables as well. In that case, local variables will be referred. So in order to access the instance variables where the local variables also having the same name, then we will be using this dot the variable name. This is the first use which we have experienced, and the second use which I have shown you is how to invoke the constructor. How to invoke the constructor. So this brackets without parameters or with parameters, you can invoke the respective constructor. So this is used to invoke the constructor, that also we have seen with examples. And lastly, the third use of this I have shown you, when you have a method with its return type as the class name, which indicates you that you have to return the type of the class. You have to return the type of the class. So in that case, we will be writing return space this. So if you write return space this, that indicates we are returning the class type. We are returning the class type. So these are the three uses of this we have also discussed. And I said that in today's class we are going to cover the uses of super and final, which comes as part of inheritance. So I hope all of you have gone through this classes and objects PDF. And if you are having any other queries, do post in the comment section. And please do not post your roll numbers right now. I'll let you know when you have to post it, because there will be timestamp associated when you are giving something in the comment section, I mean the chat box. So please post the roll numbers only when asked, not now. And this is all we have covered in the last class. I have directly explained you in the IDE itself how we are going to use all these things. And I hope you got the answers for this quiz as well. Here you can see there is a class sample, and then an integer variable declared, and within the main method you can see this dot. This I also said in the last class. So this cannot be used within the static context. This cannot be used within the static context. So this will raise an error, because main is a static method and you are trying to access the I value, which is an instance variable, using this. So this will raise an error because this cannot be used from a static method. And this is the second question. So here what you are doing is, yeah, here you can see there is a class sample and a instance variable integer I value, and then sample constructor, which is expecting an integer argument, and then setting the instance value to the value that is passed at the time of object creation, and then you are just displaying that within the constructor itself. So it's very simple program. It's very simple program. Now what will be the output? So when you try to execute this, you will get an error, because I already said you JVM will add the default parameterless constructor only if you don't define your constructor. JVM will add the default parameterless constructor only when you don't define your own constructor. But in this case, you can clearly see that we have already defined our own constructor, which is expecting an integer argument, which is expecting an integer argument. So there is no point of invoking this parameterless constructor when you define your own constructor which expects an integer argument. So this will raise an error, because JVM will not add this no argument constructor to your program. So you have to pass an integer argument here, then only this program works fine. So these are the answers for the quiz questions here you can see. Now let's move on to the next concept, that is encapsulation and abstraction. With this encapsulation and abstraction, we will also cover the access specifiers, and then I'll show you directly in the IDE how we are going to understand the uses of super and final. All that I'll explain you with examples, and also I'll give tips what you will be getting in the assessments, because my idea is not just to cover the concept, also give you the tips how you are going to be asked in the assessment exams, not only for Wipro, it can be even for the other IT companies as well. So here coming to encapsulation and abstraction. So we already know that OOP concepts means, that is the object oriented programming concepts means, it covers four pillars: abstraction, encapsulation, inheritance, polymorphism. And by the definition of object oriented programming, anyway classes and objects will be there. Apart from that, these are the four pillars of the object oriented programming language: abstraction, encapsulation, inheritance, and polymorphism. Now coming to abstraction. Abstraction means projecting only the essential interfaces. Projecting only the essential interfaces. So that's what abstraction is all about. So we are not going to focus on the internal details. We are just going to project only the interfaces that are sufficient for the end user to interact with the application. So whatever the interfaces that are required for the end user in order to interact with the application and get his task accomplished, only those interfaces are projected to the end user, thereby hiding the internal details. That's what the abstraction is all about. And next, the second important feature of object oriented programming is encapsulation. What is encapsulation? You can understand it by the word itself, capsule. So what you see with a capsule, so all the medicine ingredients will be inside, protected with this outer layer. In similar fashion, this encapsulation is also similar to the capsule concept, how the data and methods of a class are binded. That's what encapsulating means. So here, what a class contains the data and methods. So this data and methods have to be binded into a logical unit. That's what we call it encapsulating. That's what we call it encapsulating. Just to take an example again, yesterday we have, in my previous session I have discussed about the person class. So we have understood by that person class will be having some data like name, height, age, weight, something, all these things we have discussed. And we have also discussed the methods, what a person class will possess. Now, putting all this into one single unit, that's what we call it encapsulating. Rather than describing separately, putting all them into one single logical unit, we call it encapsulation. So that's what encapsulation. So it acts like a protecting layer. It acts like a protecting layer where all the data and methods of one class are binded into a single logical unit. That is what encapsulation is all about. Whereas abstraction, as I just said, it is projecting only the essential interfaces for the end user to interact with the application in order to accomplish his task. That's what abstraction is all about. And the third one is the inheritance. And the third one is the inheritance. As you can understand by the term inheritance, inheritance is all about inheriting the properties from the parent. Inheriting the properties from the parent. So you will be having an existing class and you create some new class from the existing class. Then the existing class becomes the parent class or super class. We call it the parent class or super class, or even sometimes we call it by the name base class. These are all the synonyms kind of thing that we refer to the existing class, because it is the one which is giving its properties to the newly created class. That is the reason the existing class becomes the parent class or super class or base class. Whereas the newly created class we call it as the child class or subclass or derived class. These are the synonyms. You just need to understand, because we don't know with what name you will be getting in the multiple choice questions. So parent, child, base, derived, super, sub. These are the synonyms. These are the matching synonyms. You have to understand it. So automatically here the child class will be inheriting all the data and methods of its parent except the private. Understand this point. We will come to it later. So the child class will inherit all the properties and behaviors of the parent except private. That is what the inheritance is all about. And the fourth pillar is polymorphism. As the name itself makes you understand, poly means many, morph means forms. So a single method behaving differently in different situations. A single method behaving differently in different situations. That is what we call polymorphism. For example, if I just say I have a method add, I have a method add, and this add method is defined inside a class which is taking two integer arguments. By the name of the method you can understand that it is used to add two numbers. Similarly, I am defining another method with the same method name add, and now inside this second add method I am passing two float arguments. Now this second add method is going to add two float numbers, two real numbers, and one more add I am defining which is having two string arguments. So this third add method is performing concatenation of two strings. Concatenation of two strings. So this is what one method behaving differently. So when I call this method add, I have to pass two arguments. Based on the arguments what I am going to pass, if the arguments are two integers, then the first add method will be invoked, which will perform addition of two integers. If I am calling the add method by passing two float values as arguments, then the second add method will be invoked, which will result with two float numbers addition. If I call this add method by passing two strings as arguments, then the third add method will be invoked, which performs the concatenation of strings. So this is what the polymorphism is all about. So single method performing differently with respect to the different inputs or arguments, you can say. Another real time example if we need to understand is, if we take the example of shopping cart. If we take the example of shopping cart, we have added items to our shopping cart, and when we proceed to the billing section, depending on the mode of payment, depending on the mode of payment, if the mode of payment is cash, if the mode of payment is cash, the bill value will be something, whereas if the mode of payment is card, then the bill value might differ a little bit because of some charges levied on card. That means your items in the cart are not changed, but the billing operation generating two different values based on the mode of payment. That means if the input is cash, the bill value will be something. If the input is card, the bill value will be something else. So the same billing operation generating two different values depending on the input, being it cash or card. Like this we can also consider some real time examples. Like this we can also consider some real time examples as part of this polymorphism. Now these are the four basic building blocks of any object oriented programming language. What are they? Abstraction, encapsulation, inheritance, and polymorphism. So these are the four pillars of any object oriented programming language. Now let me get into today's concepts, which I already said you that I am going to cover the uses of super and final and give you tips for the exam point of view. In the assessments also you can expect these code snippets which you are supposed to predict the output. If it is error, what kind of error also you should be able to understand. All these things you can only be able to tell exactly if you explore them. So let me uh, show my eclipse, and let me use the magnifier for making it more visible. So I hope everyone is able to clearly see this. Let me create a class for making you understand. And let me name this as some test and click finish. Yeah, class test is created. Class test is created. Here, let's discuss about packages later. Right now, don't worry about that. Class test is created. Now, here I'll just write final int n equal to 10. I'm discussing about final keyword first, and after discussing about final keyword, I'll introduce you to super uses. Along with that, I'll also tell what are the ways of asking questions here. Final int n equal to 10, and then void m sys out control space, and then I'm just displaying n. And let me also add a main method, main control space, include this, and then let me create the object for this test ob equal to new test. Observe here, I don't have my own constructor. So JVM will add the default parameterless constructor to my class, and I'm just saving this, and then I'm invoking ob.m. I hope everyone knows what will be the output. Here, if I just run this, you can see very simple. You can easily predict the output. So you can see that 10 being displayed. You can just see the 10 being displayed. So there's nothing complication in this. Now I'll show what is the difference. Now if I write here n plus plus, now you can see the red cross mark being shown, and if you move your cursor there, you can read it. The final field test.n cannot be assigned. So this is the point I would like to convey here. So final variables cannot be modified. So final variables are constants. Final variables are constants which cannot be modified. So here the variable n, which is assigned with value 10 and which is declared as final, can only be used but cannot be modified by any of the methods of the class. I repeat, here the variable n, which is assigned with a value and declared to be final, can only be used by any of the methods of this class but cannot modify. So this is the first use of final. So final data cannot be modified. Final data cannot be modified. This is the point you need to understand. Now, another point I would like to tell is here, if I just say final int n, final int n, again you can see some error. Now again you can see some error. So final int n, if you observe, I have just declared a variable n to be final, but I haven't set its value. And if I am trying to set the value from the method of the class, again it is raising error. You can just see there. Cannot be assigned. So here the point to be noted is final variables can only be initialized in the constructor of the class. I repeat, final variables can only be initialized in the constructor of the class. This is the point I would like to make here. So final variables, if they are not initialized when they are declared, they can only be initialized in the constructor of the class, but not in the normal methods. But not in the normal methods. Now, just see here what I am trying to do. Okay, rather than modifying this, let us define our own constructor. Test, and here I'll write n equal to 10 semicolon, and here I'll just remove this statement. Now you can see no red cross marks. Now you can see no red cross marks. So that means the error is resolved. So this is the point I would like to make here. So final variables can only be initialized in the constructor, not in the normal methods. Now output doesn't matter here. I just made my point what it is. So here you can see again the same output 10. With the point to be noted from this code is, so final variables can only be initialized within the constructor. Now, one more point I would like to make here is, so here you can see I have declared final static int n. I have declared final static int n, but still it is saying some error. Now, this is the next point I want to make here. Now you can see that error is resolved. So this is the second point I would like to make. So final static integers, final static variables, not only integers, final static variables can only be initialized within the static block, not even in the constructor, not even in the constructor. I hope everyone got these 2 points. So final variables cannot be modified. Next, final variables can only be initialized within the constructor. And the third point which I just made here is static final variables. Static final variables can only be initialized in the static block, not even in the constructor, not even in the constructor. So these are the points you need to remember with regard to final variables. I just covered only final variables. So final variables cannot be modified. Final variables can only be initialized in the constructor. Final static variables can only be initialized in the static block. I hope everyone understood with this. Now let me discuss final methods. So here you can see I have written final void yum. I have written final void yum. Now if I write void yum, which is expecting some integer argument, sys out control space, and I'm just printing that a. Now if you observe, there's nothing mistake in this ob.yum, within brackets I'm writing some 20. So you can see this code, it's very simple. What I have done is, there is a class test and some final static integer variable n equal to 10, and then here you can see test constructor, which is not of any use. I just declared it to be empty. Final void yum, so void yum of int a, and then I'm just printing this a, which is being passed when called. So here ob.yum. So this works fine. This works fine. So what we call this is, this we call it as method overloading. This we call it as method overloading. So final methods can be overloaded. This is the second rule you have to remember with regard to final methods. So final method can be overloaded, but final methods cannot be overridden. Final methods cannot be overridden. Now what is the difference between overloading and overriding? So overloading means the same method name different argument list with different argument list or types. That is what method overloading. The same method name within the same class with the different arguments or types of arguments, with the different arguments or types of arguments within the same class, that we call it as method overloading. That we call it as method overloading. On the other hand, what is method overriding? Method overriding means we will be having parent class and child class, parent class and child class, and whatever the method that is defined inside the parent, whatever the method that is defined inside the parent, the same method, if it is defined once again by the child, we call it method overriding. I repeat, method overloading means the same method name with different number of arguments or types of arguments within the same class, we call it method overloading. Coming to method overriding, whatever the method that is defined by a parent, the same method with the same type, with the same number of arguments, everything same to same, if it is redefined by the child, then we call it method overriding. We call it method overriding. Now, what is the statement I made with regard to final methods? So, final methods can be overloaded but cannot be overridden. Final methods can be overloaded but cannot be overridden. Now, here you just observe for your understanding, I am just writing another class some B. Extends is the keyword we use to inherit a class test. Now you can just see I have final void and this worked, this particular thing worked fine. Now I'll just remove this. And then this statement also not required because I just deleted that method. And here you can see now what I'm doing, void Now you can see red cross mark which indicates error, because here this method is declared as final. Now if you move your cursor here, you can see cannot override the final method from test. Cannot override the final method from test. So this is the point you need to remember. So final methods cannot be overridden. Final methods cannot be overridden. So this is the second use of final, so which cannot be overridden. Next, one more use of final. Suppose if I just make it observe what did I do. So I just made the class test as final. Now you can see the error. Again there is a red cross mark. If you just move your cursor over there, you can understand B cannot subclass the final class test. So this is the third use of final. So final class cannot be inherited. Final class cannot be inherited. So since I have declared class test as final, that cannot be reused. That cannot be reused. So I cannot inherit the final class. So that's the error you can see here. So if I just remove this, then if you save it, you can see no errors. If any errors are there, even here you can see the red cross mark. Earlier I hope you have observed, you can see the red cross mark even here. So that's what the points regarding final. So final variables cannot be modified. Final methods can be overloaded but cannot be overridden. Final class cannot be inherited. Final class cannot be inherited. These are the three uses of final. Next, one more point I would like to make here. Last one regarding final. So final test. Again you can see one error. What is this error? If you move your cursor over there, you can understand. illegal modifier for the constructor in type test. Only public, protected, and private are permitted for the constructor. So the constructor cannot be declared final. The constructor cannot be declared final. Remember all these points. These are the only possible questions that you can get with final. So you might be given a code snippet where you might be given some final test like this. Final constructor, and you will be asked to predict the output. In that case, you should choose the correct option, which makes understand that constructor cannot be declared final. Similarly, you can also be given something like this, and this static block will not be given in the code snippet. You should also mark it as error, because static final variables can only be initialized within the static block. Similarly, normal final variable without the constructor trying to initialize that variable within the method. This is another way of asking. So that also you should remember. So final variables can only be initialized in the constructor, not in the normal methods. These are the points you need to remember. So constructor can never be declared final. This point also should be remembered. So these are the uses of final. Now let's discuss the uses of super. Let's discuss the uses of super with a few examples. Now what I'll do is I'll just take this, and here class. I'm just modifying the same program. Observe this. I'm just creating a few classes for having this inheritance concept. So I have created class test1, and then I have created another class test2, which is extending from test1, and then this class test, which is extending from test2. Let me remove this statement here. Now just carefully observe what I have done here. So I have a class test1, I have class test2, I have class test, which is extending from test2. So let me just give you a brief about the inheritance. So as we have already just discussed, inheritance is all about inheriting the properties of the parent. So we can create a new class which is extending from another class. So that existing class becomes the parent class, and the newly created class becomes the child class. Now this child class can access all the data and methods of the parent except the private. Except the private. I'll come about this access specifiers in a short while. Don't worry. So except those variables or methods that are declared private, all the remaining data and methods can be accessed by the child directly. Can be accessed by the child directly. Now here, let me define some variable int n equal to 10, and then let me also define one constructor of its own, test1, and then just display some message, sys out control space. This is a test1 class, and let me just copy this and paste it in remaining codes by just modifying things. Here what I'll do is I'll just make it 20, n equal to 20, and here instead of test1 I'll just rename it as test2. Here also this is a test2 class, and once again let me do it with another class. Yeah, here let me just make it as 30, Then just make this test class, control S. Yeah, just carefully observe what I have done. So I have created three classes. Test1 is the parent, and test2 child of test1, and test child of test2. So observe the hierarchy: test1, test2, and test. So it's something like this: test is the grandchild, test2 is the parent of test1 is the grandparent of test. Observe this hierarchy. And if you carefully observe, all these three classes have their own constructors. And all these three classes have their own instance variable, which is integer n, In the test1 class, n is defined as 10. In the test2 class, n is defined as 20. In test class, n is defined as 30. Now observe this. What I am doing, test ob equal to new test. So I am calling the third, the grandchild test class constructor. I am calling the grandchild test class constructor. So there is parent constructor, there is grandparent constructor as well. But when I am invoking the grandchild constructor, what will be the output? I just want you to think within your mind what will be the output for this program. Some of you might have guessed it correct, some of you might have guessed it wrong. You can just observe this. So here you can see, to your surprise, so even though I'm calling only the grandchild constructor, the parent constructors were also being invoked. This is the point you should understand. So by default, when a child class constructor is invoked, when the child class constructor is invoked, the parent class parameterless constructor, I repeat, whenever the child class constructor is invoked, the parent class parameterless constructor will be invoked automatically. So that is the reason here, when I am invoking only the test class constructor, by default this test class constructor is having an argument like this. This is what, observe this, this is what, like this. I haven't written, now I have written, but this will be added automatically by the Java compiler. So this super indicates that it is calling the parent class constructor. Now I have written explicitly, but even though you don't write it, by default this statement will be added to the subclass constructor, the child class constructor. So similarly, this statement will also be added in the parent class constructor. This all will be done automatically by the Java compiler. That is the reason, when you are calling the child class constructor, implicitly Java compiler will add this super without any arguments. This statement will be added as the first statement in the child class constructor, which in turn invokes the parent class constructor. Again, in the parent class constructor, the first statement will be implicitly added by the Java compiler like this, and again it in turn calls the grandparent. So that is the reason you got the output test1 class, test2 class, and test class. That's what the output you can see here. So this is the point you should note down. Now, so I want to make more understanding for you. Suppose if I am having here test2 of, Now if you observe, what is happening? Implicit super constructor test2 is undefined, must explicitly invoke another constructor. Must explicitly invoke another constructor. What is happening here? So this particular test, as I said, implicitly it will be calling the super parameterless. So implicitly when it is calling super parameterless, there is no such constructor, because the parent class constructor is now expecting an integer argument. But as I said, Java compiler will by default add the super parameterless. But when the parent is expecting an integer argument, the Java compiler's default addition of super parameterless fails here. So that's the reason you can see the error here. These are all the things which need to be carefully observed, because these things only will be there mostly asked in many of the company assessment exams. So here, earlier statement what I made was, when you are invoking the child class constructor, implicitly Java compiler will add super parameterless statement within the child class constructor, which in turn invokes the parent constructor. But what is happening here is, when this child class constructor is invoked, as I said, there is nothing argument written here, but implicitly Java compiler will add this statement, but the problem here is, when this statement is by default added by Java compiler, the parent constructor is expecting an integer argument. So that's the reason it is raising error. Now what I have to do is, I have to pass some integer argument. Now you can see there is no error, the error is resolved. So this is the point you need to understand. So when the child class constructor is called, implicitly parent constructor without argument will be called by Java compiler. But if parent constructor is defined with expecting some argument, then the child constructor's first statement should be called to the parent constructor. The child constructor's first statement should be called to the parent constructor. How the parent constructor will be called? By using this super and the brackets, and within the brackets arguments have to be passed as expected by the parent constructor. So when you are calling this super with brackets, arguments are to be passed as expected by the parent, this is the point to be noted here. Another point I want to convey here is, observe this, what I have done, I have just pasted it after the print statement. So when I move my mouse cursor over there, you can see what is the error. Constructor call must be the first statement in a constructor. Constructor call must be the first statement in a constructor. So you can call the parent constructor from the child constructor only as the very first statement, only as the very first statement. This is the point I wanted to make. So calling a parent constructor can only happen from the child constructor, that too which has to be the very first statement in the child constructor. Remember this point. So calling parent class constructor from the child class constructor only can be done, that too which has to be the very first statement from the child class constructor. This is the point to be noted. So I hope everyone so far understood what I have discussed with regard to super. So when you are calling the subclass constructor, implicitly JVM adds the parameterless super constructor as the first statement. This you need not write, this will be automatically done by JVM. That's the reason earlier you have seen this output. But if the parent constructor is defined which is expecting some argument, then since JVM adds this super implicitly, it won't work, because parent is expecting some integer argument. So you have to do it manually. So this is the point you need to understand. I hope everyone understood this point. So this is the first point I want you to remember. Now the next point. Coming to next point. Now suppose if I want to display n value here. If I want to display n value here, let me remove this, which I have just written for your understanding, and remove this statement as well. And here what I'll be doing is, instead of writing this, I'm just writing n. So here you can see the grandparent is having n defined as 10, the parent is having n defined as 20, the child is having n defined as 30, and now here you can see I'm just displaying n. I hope most of you know what will be the output. So when I'm displaying this n, what will be the output? So let me run this, and now you can see test1 class, test2 class, and 30. Again, I need not explain, because when I am invoking child class constructor, in turn the parent constructor will be called from the child constructor by Java compiler adding this super without arguments as the first statement. It automatically does that. That's the reason we need not do that. So that's the reason, again this is called, again there will be super added here by Java compiler automatically without arguments. That's the reason this output and this output here. But now, what if you want to print the parent n here? What if you want to print the parent n here? Then what I have to say is super dot. What I have to say here, super dot. So I have to say super dot n. If I say super dot n, automatically the compiler understands that you are not trying to access the n from your class, you are trying to access the n from the parent class. You are trying to access the n from the parent class. Let me just run this and show you the output. Now you can see test1 class, test2 class, and 20. So the n is displayed from the parent class. Now what if you want to display the grandparent n? What if you want to display the grandparent n? So can I write like this? Can I write like this? No. You can see their error. You can see their error. So here, by using super, you can only refer to the immediate parent only. I repeat, by using super, you can refer only to the immediate parent, not the grandparent. So this is error. So only the immediate parent can be referred by using super. This point to be noted. So that's the reason you got error when I have written super dot super dot. So this is not only with variables, even with methods you can do this. So for your understanding, let me just write. So void m. I'm just having a method. I'm just having a method defined, and let me just write here sys out control space, and let me just say this as parent method. And similarly, let me have the same method name. Let me have the same method name here in the test class also. Instead of writing this parent, let me write this as child method. So now you can see what I have done. So what I have done, so the grandparent not having any method, and then the parent having this m method, parent method, and the grandchild is also having the same m method, which is defined by the parent but overridden. This is what we call as overriding. So method overriding. So here you can see whatever the method that is defined by parent, the same method redefined by child, redefined by child with same name, with same type, and with same number of arguments. I mean here no arguments, but that's what we call method overriding. Now what I am doing here is, if I just try to call this method m, if I just try to call this method m from the constructor of the child, I am just trying to call the method m from the child constructor. Now Again, this is the same what you have expected. So you can see child method being displayed. So by default, the compiler, when it sees for this method it's already defined in the child. So child method is invoked. Suppose if I want to execute that parent method, what I have to do? Super dot. So if I just write it as super dot, now I am saying compiler that I am trying to invoke my parent method So you can see here parent method. You can see here parent method. So I hope everyone understood the uses of super, and few more things I would like to convey here. Now these are the uses of super. Now let me tell you. Suppose here I am writing test 2. I am writing test 2. This is also fine because test 2 is the parent. So parent class object, sorry, parent class reference variable can be used to refer subclass object. Understand this point. This is very important. So here test2 is the parent class. So OB is the reference variable of parent class. Here OB is the reference variable of parent class. And when I am writing a new test, so object is created for the grandchild. Object is created for the grandchild. So this is the parent. And what is the grandparent? Test1. Observe this hierarchy. Test1 is the grandparent, test2 is the parent, test is the child. Grandparent, parent, child. Now here, what is happening? Child object is created. So new test, child object is created. And here OB is the reference variable of parent. Reference variable of parent. So parent reference variable can refer to the child object. Underline this statement. Parent reference variable can refer to the child object. So this is legal. And now if I just try to access ob.yum, if I just try to access ob.yum, now which method will be executed? Just making you to think. Now what I am doing here, the reference variable ob is for parent, but which is pointing to? It is pointing to child object. And here I am calling ob.yum. Here I am calling ob.yum. And here ob is reference variable of parent, but currently pointing to child object. So when I access this method yum, which will be invoked? Which will be invoked? Understand the output. So you can see child method. What is being displayed? Child method. So it doesn't matter the reference variable is of what type. What matters is what it is pointing to. What it is pointing to. So here OB, even though it is reference variable for parent, but currently it is pointing to child object. So when I am accessing any data or method, only the child things will be displayed. Only the child things will be displayed. So this is the point I wanted to convey here. And next, one more point I wanted to tell you here is, even this you can do it for test also. Even you can do it for test. So here you can see test2 ob equal to new test. Sorry, test1 I should write, test1. So for grandparent, I have written this. But you can see there one error. I will explain what it is. So test1 ob equal to new test. So grandparent reference variable pointing to child object. But now there is one error. The reason is, the reason earlier it did not give error and now why it is giving error is, here you can see when I have moved my mouse cursor there, the method m is undefined for type test1. So here if you carefully observe, the method m, it's not defined in the grandparent class. So grandparent does not have any knowledge that the child is having some method m, even though the reference variable is pointing to child class object, but still the reference variable is of grandparent. The reference variable is of grandparent. So the reference variable of grandparent can point to child class object, but still it doesn't know the exclusive behaviors of the child. It doesn't know the exclusive behaviors of the child. So here, earlier we did not get that error when I have written here test2. When I have written test2, you did not get that error. The reason is test2 also have this method m. The reason is test2 also have this method m. So that's the reason earlier you did not get error when I have written this test2. But when I am writing here test1, you are getting the error. The reason is test1 is legal to have its reference variable pointing to the test object, but it doesn't have method m defined, so its reference variable cannot be used to access the m method which is exclusive for test. So this is the point to be noted here. So you have two quick fixes. Here you can see create method m in type test1. This is one of the fix, and the other one is add cast to OB. These are the two things you can make use of IDE options. If I add cast to OB, then you can see what happens. Then you can see what happens. Then the error is resolved. So what I am saying, this particular OB, I am casting it to the parent type rather than the parent. I am just casting it to the parent type. So this is the point you need to understand. Now what happens? This OB is of type parent now. Is of type parent. Since parent is already having this m method, now it is legal to call this m method of the child. Now it is legal to access the m method of the child. So it is just similar to the earlier case when I have test2 OB equal to new test. It's nothing but similar to test2 OB equal to new test. So this is the point you should understand. So whatever the points I have covered in this class, I hope everyone understood. Once again, just to reiterate, I'm just telling. So final variables cannot be modified. Final variables can only be initialized in the constructor of the class. Static final variables can only be initialized in the static block. Final methods can be overloaded but cannot be overridden. Final class cannot be inherited. These are the things which I have covered with regard to final. Next, coming to super. So super can be used to invoke parent class constructor from the subclass constructor, which has to be the very first statement in the subclass constructor, and by default when the subclass constructor is invoked, super parameterless statement will be automatically added by Java compiler within the subclass constructor. So this points to be noted. And also super can be used to access the parent class variables or methods from the subclass which also have the same variable name or the same method name as it is which is there in the parent class. If the variable names or method names are different from that of the parent, then child class can directly access them. There's nothing wrong. Like, let me show you here example. Suppose if I have here instead of n, if I have m, then when I have m, there's nothing wrong here. Instead of using this, I can directly write m. There's nothing wrong here. Here you can see directly I can print m. Actually m is not defined in this class. M is of the parent class. So by default parent class data and methods are accessible to the child. By default the parent class data and methods are accessible to the child. It's only when you have the same variable name or method name that are used by the parent also used by the child, then in order to access the parent data or methods from the child class, you have to use super dot variable name or super dot method name. This is how. Otherwise, you can directly access the parent class data or methods from the child class. And next, the last point which I have explained you just now is, so parent class reference variable can be used to point to the child class object. Parent class reference variable can be used to point to the child class object. But when you are accessing any of the data or methods, that data or methods should also be defined by the parent, should also be defined by the parent, just like what you have seen here. Suppose if I have test2 here, that's fine, no need of this casting also, that's fine. So but the point to be noted is, the parent also should have defined that method. It might be overridden by the child, it might be overridden by the child, but whatever the method or data that you are accessing with the parent reference variable should be known to the parent, should be known to the parent. That means parent also should have defined that data or method. That means parent also should have defined that data or method, even though it is overridden by the child. Then only parent reference variable can be used to access the child data or methods. And the last point I would like to make here is, the reverse is not possible. The reverse is not possible. Let me just write a statement and show you. Test ob2 equal to new test2. This is illegal. This is illegal. Now you can see the error. When you move your mouse cursor, it will tell. Cannot convert from test2 to test. So here the point to be noted is, parent reference variable can be pointing to child object, but child reference variable cannot point to parent object. I repeat, parent reference variable can point to child object, but child reference variable cannot point to parent object. Remember this point. So only parent have access to the child things, but child, sorry, I mean not like that. Parent reference has access to the child object memory reference, whereas child reference cannot have access to the parent memory reference. This is the point to be noted here. So these are the important things you need to remember with regard to final and super. All these things I hope everyone understood. If any of you have queries, please post in the comment section, so that now itself I'll answer those queries before we end this session. And now I want you to post your roll numbers. If anybody have queries, you can post it in the comment section, or you can post your roll numbers for attendance purpose. Okay, I have not seen any queries. That means I hope everyone understood, and I have received your roll numbers for attendance. So let's meet in tomorrow's session. And as I said, you can refer to the logic building problem that I have posted in my channel. That is a message control robot movement. That is the very last problem as part of your logic building hour plan M2B. That is the 47th exercise. I hope all of you have begun your logic building exercises. And as I said, if any of you are unable to solve any of the logic building problem, do let me know so that I'll explain it for all. And similarly, if any other optimized solutions you are having, whenever I'm posting my solution, you can do post your optimized solution in the comment section, which can be utilized by others as well. Okay, then let's wind up for today and meet in tomorrow's class again at same time 10:30 a.m. And please open this PBLapp in the early hours or post evening hours and try to do the hands-on assignments and click on the check boxes which I have said you earlier, and then update it. This is what I mean. Click on the check boxes and then update it like this. Select the check boxes and click on update completion status. Okay, then bye and let's meet tomorrow.